In 1961, a man responsible for organizing the deportation of millions of people sat inside a bulletproof glass booth in Jerusalem. Reporters filled the courtroom, expecting a monster, a face twisted with hatred. What they found instead was a small, balding man who kept adjusting his glasses and asking for clarification on dates. He didn't rage. He complained about paperwork. The writer Hannah Arendt watched the entire trial. And the phrase she coined afterward became famous for a reason nobody expected. Evil, she said, doesn't always look monstrous. Sometimes it looks bored. That observation launched one of the most disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. 3 months after that trial began, a psychologist at Yale wanted to know something specific. Could it happen here? Could ordinary Americans do what ordinary Germans had done? Before he ran a single test, Stanley Milgram asked psychiatrists to predict the results. Their answer, maybe 1 person in 1,000 would go all the way. Only the most disturbed few would even come close. Then he built the machine, a row of switches labeled from 15 volts up to 450. Volunteers were told they were helping test memory. Every time the learner in the next room got an answer wrong, they had to flip the next switch. Nobody was asked to go to 450 volts on their first switch. Nobody would have agreed to that. They were only ever asked to go 1 switch further than the one they'd already flipped. By the end, 65% of ordinary volunteers had gone all the way to the top. Every single one of them had gone at least to 300. Not 1 in 1,000. 2 out of every 3. They weren't monsters walking in the door. They were walked there, 15 volts at a time. Milgram didn't stop at one version of the experiment. He ran it again and again, changing 1 detail each time. When the volunteer had to sit in the same room as the person they were shocking, obedience dropped. When he moved the whole experiment out of Yale's prestigious labs into a rundown office building, it dropped further still. Under half the people went all the way. But then he tried the opposite. He let the volunteer simply tell someone else to flip the switch, never touching it themselves. Obedience didn't drop, it rose. Over 90% went all the way to the end. Distance wasn't a side detail in this. It was the whole mechanism. The less a person had to feel the weight of what they were causing, the easier it became to keep going. Which brings us back to that glass booth. Adolf Eichmann never personally killed anyone with his own hands. His job was logistics, train schedules, transport lists, quotas. He was, by his own account, several desks and several countries away from the killing itself. At his trial, his defense echoed something Milgram would later hear from volunteers who wanted to stop but didn't. He was just following orders. Someone else further up the chain was responsible. The court rejected that defense, and rightly so. Distance from an act doesn't erase responsibility for it, but it does explain something the verdict alone couldn't. How a system built from small bureaucratic steps and long chains of distance can move thousands of ordinary officials towards something monstrous without any single one of them ever feeling like they crossed a line. Put the glass booth and the shock machine side by side, and the mechanism is identical. Nobody is asked to commit an atrocity in 1 step. They're asked to go 1 switch further than the last time, and nobody has to feel the full weight of the outcome because somewhere in the chain, someone else is holding the wire. Escalation in small steps. Distance from the consequence. Those 2 things together are most of what wickedness actually requires. So here's the uncomfortable part. Most people who end up doing terrible things never experience a single moment that feels like crossing a line. The line erodes 15 volts at a time, and by the time it would matter, it's already behind them. The people in Milgram's lab weren't unusually cruel. They were ordinary volunteers who answered a newspaper ad. 65% of them, statistically speaking, were you. The only real defense isn't waiting for a moment that feels wrong. It's asking at every single switch whether you'd still flip it if you had to watch what it did. That question is the only thing standing between an ordinary person and the boring, bureaucratic shape wickedness usually takes.